We call it the French and Indian War, but that name is a lie. It makes it sound like some small local skirmish in the backwoods of Pennsylvania. It wasn't. It was the match that lit the entire world on fire. Winston Churchill called it the First World War. It was fought in America, Europe, the Caribbean, India, and the Philippines. And the man who started it? He wasn't a king. He wasn't some grizzled veteran general. He was a terrifyingly inexperienced 22-year-old Virginian named George Washington. He didn't mean to, but on a rainy morning in 1754, in a dark glen in Pennsylvania, he made a mistake that would kill over 1 million people, bankrupt the mighty British Empire, and ironically lead directly to the birth of the United States. Of America, welcome to Part 2. This is the spark. In the mid-18th century, the most valuable real estate in the world wasn't in London or Paris. It was the Ohio River Valley. This vast, fertile territory was the key to controlling North America. The French wanted it for their lucrative fur trade. The British wanted it for settlement and expansion. Tensions were at a boiling point. The governor of Virginia decided to act. He sent a young, ambitious militia officer named George Washington into the wilderness with a simple, direct order: tell the French to leave. Now, this wasn't the wise, stoic father of his country we see on the dollar bill. This was a young man burning with ambition, desperate to make a name for himself and earn a commission in the prestigious British Army. He was reckless, inexperienced, and marching with a crucial native ally, a Seneca chief known as the Half-King. A warrior who harbored a deep and personal hatred for the French. On May 28, 1754, their scouts found what they were looking for: a small contingent of about 30 Frenchmen camped in a rocky ravine called Jumonville Glen. Believing he had the element of surprise, Washington decided to attack. He surrounded them. In the misty morning, someone fired a shot, no one knows who, and the forest erupted in gunfire. The skirmish was over in just 15 minutes. The French, caught completely off guard, quickly surrendered. What happened next would change the course of history. As Washington was trying to secure his prisoners, the Half-King walked up to the wounded French commander, an ensign named Joseph Cowlin de Jumonville. The Half-King allegedly declared, "You are not yet dead, my father," then raised his tomahawk and split the Frenchman's skull open. In a ritualistic act of vengeance, he reportedly washed his hands in the man's brains. Washington was horrified. He had lost complete control of the situation. This wasn't a clean, honorable victory. It was a brutal mess. To make matters infinitely worse, the French would later claim that Jumonville wasn't a soldier on a military mission, but a diplomat, an ambassador carrying a message of peace. Washington, in their eyes, had just ambushed and overseen the assassination of an ambassador. Paris didn't respond with a strongly worded letter of complaint. They responded by sending an army. Realizing his grave error, Washington retreated and scrambled to build a defensive position. He called it Fort Necessity. The name was unintentionally accurate. It was a pathetic little fort, just a small circular stockade of upright logs, built hastily in the middle of a low-lying meadow. It was a tactical disaster. When the French forces, led by Jumonville's vengeful brother, arrived on July 3rd, it began to rain, heavily. The meadow where Washington had built his fort quickly turned into a muddy swamp. His men were lying in cold mud and bloody water, their gunpowder soaked and useless. Meanwhile, the French and their native allies fired down on them with impunity from the shelter of the tree line. The situation was hopeless. For the first and only time in his entire military career, George Washington was forced to surrender an army. The French presented him with the Articles of Surrender, written, of course, in French. Washington, who couldn't read a word of French, signed the document. He had no idea he had just signed a confession. A legal document admitting that he had assassinated Jumonville. When this news reached the capitals of Europe, the spark became an inferno. Washington didn't return to Virginia a hero. He was the man who had blundered his way into starting a global war. Britain was furious, but also determined to win. They sent their best, thousands of professional soldiers. the iconic Redcoats, under the command of General Edward Braddock. Braddock was a textbook European general, arrogant, dismissive of colonial forces, and utterly contemptuous of the enemy he was about to face. He famously told Benjamin Franklin that savages may be a formidable enemy to your raw American militia, but upon the king's regular and disciplined troops, sir, it is impossible they should make any impression. He was catastrophically wrong. Braddock marched his army through the dense American wilderness in a long, neat European-style column, complete with blaring trumpets and beating drums. It was a perfect target. On July 9, 1755, near the Monongahela River, the French and their native allies ambushed them. They didn't stand in lines. They used the forest for cover, hiding behind trees, picking off the brightly colored British officers one by one. It was an absolute slaughter. The disciplined lines of the British army broke and fell into chaos. General Braddock was shot through the lungs. Nearly two-thirds of his army were killed or wounded, and in the middle of it all was George Washington, serving as a volunteer aide to Braddock. By all accounts, he was fearless, riding back and forth across the battlefield, trying to rally the panicked troops. He had 2 horses shot out from under him. After the battle, he found 4 bullet holes in his coat, but he himself was completely untouched. This was the moment the legend of George Washington began, the almost mythical idea that he was divinely protected, that he was bulletproof. The war he started, now officially the 7 Years' War, raged on for 9 long, bloody years. Across the globe, Britain, with its powerful navy and deep pockets, eventually emerged victorious. The 1763 Treaty of Paris was a total British triumph. They drove the French out of North America completely. The British Empire was now the undisputed global superpower, master of the world. But victory came at a staggering cost. The war had been mind-bogglingly expensive, doubling Britain's national debt. They saw this incredibly costly war had been fought primarily to secure and protect their American colonies. So, they reasoned, it was only fair that the Americans should help pay the bill. To raise that money, the King and Parliament reached for a tax. They reached for a stamp. George Washington started the war that made Britain the master of the globe. But the bill for that war would be the very thing that turned Washington and an entire generation of Americans into revolutionaries. Make sure you like and subscribe, because you won't want to miss Part 3, The Impossible War.